Hey, hi, I am Younghoon Kim. Today I'll be presenting a paper titled Discovering Symbolic Cognitive Models from Human and Animal Behavior. Please note that this is a preprint version, so some details may be updated in the final published paper. Before diving into the main paper, I'd like to briefly introduce what symbolic cognitive models are. Symbolic models use internal variables, such as prediction errors, to represent cognitive processes in a structured and interpretable way. Because these variables have clear meanings, they allow researchers to link behavior to underlying mechanisms more directly. Historically, developing these models have followed a hypothesis-first approach, where researchers propose a model based on theory and then fit it to behavioral data to test its validity. So why do we need symbolic models? First, interpretability. Unlike RNNs, which often act as black boxes, symbolic models make their internal working explicit so we can more easily understand the cognitive processes they represent. Second, individual level variability. Symbolic models let us assign specific parameters to each person, which makes it easier to capture individual differences in behavior in a structured way. And third, biological plausibility. Because the model terms are explicit, we can map them onto brain regions using model-based fMRI, which help bridge the gap between behavior and neural mechanisms. However, symbolic models have their own drawbacks as well. The space of symbolic models is vast, making it difficult to identify the best possible model. Furthermore, in the case of reinforcement learning models, the task-relevant memory often includes more than just summary statistics like Q values, and behavior can be influenced by global features of past experience. And even at the neural net level, signals once thought to map neatly onto Q values now appear far more diverse than previously assumed. Another important drawback of symbolic models is that they often underfit complex behavioral data. They can struggle to capture the richness and variability we observe in real behavior. In contrast, RNNs are much more expressive. They can flexibly approximate a wide range of model structures, which make them more likely to discover a well-fitting solution directly from data, without needing as much handcrafted model design. This trade-off between interpretability and flexibility is a key tension in modeling cognitive processes. While RNNs are powerful and can fit behavioral data quite well, they come with their own limitations. They're often treated as black boxes, as aforementioned, meaning we need additional effort, such as probing internal states or using decoding tools to understand what kind of computation is actually happening inside. Recently, there have been some creative efforts to improve their interpretability, like methods that try to extract latent update rules or identify bottlenecks in information flow. But even with these advances, these approaches still face clear limitations, and there are many open challenges when it comes to linking these models to interpretable cognitive processes. Okay, so now we've covered main hurdles in cognitive modeling. Let's walk through the method proposed in this paper, which is called CogFun Search. This figure provides a high-level overview of the entire pipeline and looks very complicated, but let us go through the process step by step. As the name suggests, the main idea is inspired by FunSearch, which was published in Nature last year. It's been 2 years, which recently showed how large language models can be used to discover new mathematical insights. Let's break this down to understand how the mechanism works. It all starts with a specification. This defines the kind of function or program we're looking for. Based on this, a prompt is constructed and passed into a pre-trained LLM. The LLM then generates multiple candidate programs in response to the prompt. These candidates are passed on to an evaluation stage where they are scored based on how well they solve the task. Some programs will fail, but some will pass and provide useful building blocks. Among the successful candidates, one or more can be selected to generate new programs. These programs become the seed for further exploration, enabling the system to iterate and improve on past results. All the high-performing programs are stored in a program database, and the best ones are reused as context in future prompts, creating a feedback loop where the LLM gets better at producing useful code by learning from what's worked so far. This is how fun search creates a kind of search loop guided by LLM generation and task evaluation. Using a similar process to fun search, fun search was applied to discover symbolic models that best fit behavioral data from humans, rats, and fruit flies. For the rat and fruit fly datasets, the task was a two-armed bandit task, a classic reinforcement learning setup where subjects choose between two options with changing reward probabilities. In contrast, the human dataset involved a four-armed bandit task. Once the program is generated by Cogfun search, the next step is to evaluate how well it explains behavioral data. In the left, we see the structure of the program. It takes in inputs like the current state, parameters, and choice and reward, and outputs the next state along with the predicted probability of the next choice. Using this, we can compute how likely the model thinks the subject's actual behavior was. In the middle, the dataset is split into odd and even trials for each subject. The program is trained on one half, say the odd trials, and then tested on the other half, say the even number, to see how well it generalizes. Finally, on the right, the validation scores from both halves are averaged to produce a single evaluation score for the program, shown in the formula at the bottom. This scoring system helps guide the research toward better, more generalizable cognitive models over time. So, how well did the discovered models actually perform? On the left, we see the evolution of Cogfun search programs over time on the rat dataset. As the search progresses, the best programs improve steadily, eventually outperforming the baseline human design model shown in gray line. On the right, we see individual level comparisons across all three datasets, human, rat, and fruit flies. Each point represents one subject, comparing the likeliest scores of the discovered models versus the human design baseline. Most points lie above zero, indicating that Cogfun search-generated models provide better fits to behavior on average across all species. So overall, this suggests that symbolic models discovered by the system can outperform expert design models in terms of both fit and generalization. An interesting insight from the paper is the role of informative seed programs, especially when modeling human data. Let's look at the two panels here. And on the left, we see performance of the fruit fly dataset. Regardless of the initial seed type, whether it's a low information or a structured model, all configurations eventually converge to similar likelihood scores. This suggests that for simpler behaviors, even uninformative seeds are enough to guide the search. However, on the right for the human dataset, when the search is seeded with structured or full models, the system finds high-performing solutions much faster and more reliably. In contrast, when starting from uninformative seeds, performance remains much lower throughout the process. This highlights that for more complex behaviors, like in humans, prior knowledge or structure can significantly enhance the model discovery. Okay, and one important question here is, do the discovered models actually reflect real behavioral patterns? On the left, we again compare the Cogfun search models against RNN-based models, which is marked in orange across humans, rats, and flies. You can see that Cogfun search models consistently perform at least as well and often better in terms of predictive likelihood. This supports the idea that symbolic models generated by the system are not just interpretable, but also competitive in performance. On the right, we look deeper into what these models capture. The plots show regression weights from trial history capturing two key behavioral signatures, reward seeking and choice preservation. Here, the red lines are derived from actual subject behavior, while the blue lines come from the best Kaufman search programs. We can see that the discovery programs closely match the shape and decay pattern of real behavior, demonstrating that they don't just fit data statistically, but also mirror the underlying dynamics of cognition. As with many modeling approaches, a trade-off between complexity and performance emerges in Kaufman search as well. The x-axis shows model performance in terms of likelihood, and the y-axis captures model complexity measured either by LLM or health set difficulty. As you can see, higher likelihood models tend to be more complex, especially for human and rat datasets. However, we also find models that strike a good balance, achieving high predictive accuracy while keeping complexity manageable. So now going on to the critics, one of the main strengths of this paper is its novel use of fund search algorithm for symbolic discovery. It introduces an automated method for generating symbolic cognitive models, which opens up new directions for building interpretable and flexible computational frameworks. That said, while the approach is clearly innovative, its practical relevance still needs to be demonstrated across a wider range of tasks and domains, especially if we want this to generalize beyond multi-arm bandit paradigms. Another key point is how LLMs facilitate interpretability. The approach cleverly uses LLMs not only to generate cognitive models automatically, but also to enforce symbolic structures that are easier to understand and analyze. So in that sense, it promotes interpretability from the start. That said, since the code is generated by a language model, there is always the chance that inconsistent or buggy logic sneaks in, so manual inspection or curation is still important. Considering this to be a purely data-driven process, there is a risk it might miss mechanistic or biologically grounded explanations, especially if those constraints aren't built into the prompt or scoring process. The prompt or initial program essentially sets the trajectory for model discovery. This means that prior knowledge or design choices can significantly influence the outcome, especially human behavior, where even subtle assumptions can have a large impact. Importantly, the seed program can act as a soft constraint that anchors the search process. In the context of purely data-driven model generation, embedding domain-specific priors, such as biological plausibility, into the seed helps ensure that the resulting models remain cognitively or neuroscientifically meaningful, not just statistically well-fitting. Recent research has shown that cognitive model parameters can be surprisingly unstable across different contexts. Even small changes in task design or environment can lead to noticeable shifts in parameter estimates. This raises an important question. Can we still claim these models genuinely reflect stable cognitive processes? And if parameters are this sensitive, can we reliably link them to clinical symptoms or psychiatric diagnosis, which is a key goal in computational psychiatry? These findings challenge the assumption that parameters are trait-like features and highlight the need for models that generalize across tasks while still capturing individual differences. In this aspect, using an LLM-based pipeline for symbolic model discovery could be further extended to prioritize the robustness of cognitive models. By refining the objective function to reward generalizability across tasks or contexts. Moreover, if we also build systems to automatically generate or adapt experimental paradigms, uh, task design and model discovery can co-evolve. This could lead to a virtuous cycle where better tasks yield clearer signals, and better models in turn guide the design or of more informative experiments. Lastly, we can also flip the perspective. Instead of using symbolic discovery just to model human behavior, we could apply it in reverse, using it to approximate or interpret complex neural networks, including large language models with symbolic surrogates. This would allow us to extract simplified, interpretable representations of what these models are doing in specific contexts, just like we do for human subjects. And importantly, such symbolic approximations could help uncover hidden biases, failure models, or unexpected strategies within neural networks, offering clearer diagnostics and guiding targeted improvements in their design. To wrap things up, I think this classic quote from George Box captures the spirit of cognitive modeling as well. All models are wrong, but some are useful. No model will ever perfectly capture the full complexity of human or animal cognition, but useful models help us reason, predict, and even design better experiments. The Kaufman search approach pushes us toward a future where symbolic models can automatically discover, making them potentially more useful, more interpretable, and hopefully more aligned with biological mechanisms. Thank you. So this is the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
So looking at the data of like the in the figure 5 in the article, I guess, so the pop functors like has the better estimates and differences of normalized likelihoods. So it was like about 5% to 10%, or maybe like
Hmm.
1%.
Hmm.
So, but when I did almost the same job as a human, and did I just basically made a new model based on the original model. So I also tried to do the same job, just like the Kaufman search. But what I realized was that the differences in normalized likelihood can be varied a lot if you just change the minor assumptions. For example, in my case, when I changed the parameters from the like the localization parameters or like the motor coast parameters, I just changed the definition, and the differences in normalist likelihood like jumps totally like about like 30% to 40%. So I'm not sure about this specific task in this context, but I'm not sure if this like jump in the normalist likelihood is that really is this really meaningful? Also, I assume that this is the likelihood, not the Bayesian information criterion or other information criterions. So I'm not
Mm.
sure if this right. So I think that the normalist likelihood does not reflect the fact that the model always gets better when there are more parameters. I'm not sure if that was like, included in this context. Also, if we look at the figure 7, so the quality of fit trades off with complexity, this
Mhm.
also shows that our data might be actually the data of uh, this might be rather like okay, so okay, so yeah, so this like the improvement in the normalized likelihood might be false because and this is rather a coincidence from the increasing number of parameters. So I'm not sure if how the authors explained this like this problem. So I'm not sure if the increase in the normalized likelihood comes from the actually better model or just from the more numbers of randomly given parameters. I'm not sure about that. So how is
Mm.
this actually explained in the article?
Uh, Based on what I know, I also searched for BIC because, as you mentioned, BIC is a um, better metric for whether the model is overfit or not. Because, as you said, like having a bunch of more parameters can actually make it to have a better likelihood. But they didn't mention about BICs. But the case is, uh, at least for what I know, the parameters itself um was a bit more than the original baseline model. So yeah, I also thought that this might be the cause of having a better likelihood. But speaking of like comparing it with the baseline was selected for the best published model that explains the multi-arm bandit task. So I think at least if this is not the outperforming of the likelihood is not due to having a lot of bunch of parameters, it still has something that we it has something that is quite reasonable and meaningful because um it actually outperformed the best human expert model um, at least in some way. So I think, as you mentioned, it is important to see whether it's just like they reached a better likelihood due to having a lot of bunch of parameters that are added to the original model or not. But yeah, they didn't mention about BIC score or something else. They just came up with a term called normalized likelihood. But I didn't really Honestly, I didn't go through the details about how they measured the normalized likelihood. And seems like they didn't really like mention exactly how they drive these terms.
Hmm, I see. Also, I am not aware of them like giving the any results of the parameter recovery or model recovery step, which is commonly done in human behavior model fitting. Is that true, or or are there data given in the supplementary part or somewhere?
They did it and they provided in the supplementary
Oh, I see.
one, as
Uh,
you can see here. Yeah, it's
okay, I see.
quite beautifully recovered.
Okay, I see. Okay, thanks.
I think Chebom had one comment or question.
Yeah, so there's I know a little bit less about this, so I was just curious as to what is the history of symbolic models. So before LLMs, did we have symbolic models? So what were previous symbolic approaches
Mm.
that attempted to be interpretable?
Basically, so symbolic models are like if you think about cognitive computational models, those are mostly symbolic cognitive models, like using tabular RL to model human behavior in RL tasks. Those would be called symbolic models because you use prediction errors, learning rates, and some very simple mathematical formula to kind of estimate the human behaviors or rat or other animals' cognition. So those are all called symbolic models. And I'm not sure whether the only opponent is RNNs, but mostly if you say like if you're not using symbolic cognitive models and you're trying to come up with some kind of like modeling for human behavior, in like for the last few years, mostly they use RNNs. As you can see in this figure, so the best RL here is on the right below is a tabular model, which is a symbolic model, whereas the vanilla RNN or ANN are neural network models.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I mean, the kind of reason that I asked this is because, you know, I'm not sure if I understood this correctly, but this is really like making a function and program through the
Mm,
fun search, right? So,
correct.
but the symbolic models the main reason we use symbolic models seems to be because they are interpretable, but I think that perhaps, I don't know. Are we
Mm,
sure that these AI generated code is really that interpretable? So, I mean, we've all had the experience of reading someone else's code that often made no sense. So I was,
mm,
I
yeah.
was, it was not really clear to me if that interpretability was really achieved.
Mm, yeah. I totally agree. And here, what they claim is that maybe it's because the LLMs are already trained for like previously suggested symbolic models that were suggested in cognitive psychology or computational neuroscience. They do use some terms that are like reasonable. Like they use the term learning rate for variables that represent learning rates and Q values for values that are similar to Q values or other stuff. Or they use like alpha state or uh let me show you one example of the result. Um okay. Okay, so this one is one of the results of the human data. As you can see, they use a term called Q values and they update Q values in a quite reasonable way. So yeah, I think it might be due to like their prior knowledge about psychology and mathematics.
Okay, okay. So I wasn't really sure. Yeah, looking at this code, I think I understand. And
Mm.
yeah, so I did have a second question. So, like you mentioned in your presentation about like this biological or mechanistic possibility, but this like I understand how in the abstract how this can be possible, but could you have a bit more
Mm.
examples of what you had in mind?
Well, maybe for example, like if we have the C program to provide the initial program that you have to start with, and if that model is already confirmed to be quite biologically plausible, it might work as that's the reason why I said it's a uh soft constraint, not like a very hard constraint to kind of reflect the biological plausibility for those symbolic models that emerges from the large language models. But yeah, I think that's one good example. Or like for example, like if you want to kind of have like a come up with a good model that reflects, I don't know, maybe you want, if you were trying to use the hippocampus model like CSCG or Thomann-Eichenbaum machine in your model, you can input the model's computational process and give a prompt to the large language model to kind of reflect those uh, equations in your model or so. Because I actually tried it when I like just for fun when I was trying to model my own experiments results. And it turns out large language models kind of understand what I want, and they're really good at trying to mimic the like ideas I try to suggest to them into the model. Like it's a different story about whether it fits well to the behavior data, but if you really want to like lead them to a certain way, I think that's a good way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
I think the beauty of this paper is that it kind of automatically it provides a idea of automatically generating many different cognitive models that like if you're imagine like if you're a experimenter and if you're trying to come up with a bunch of different cognitive models and try to fit them into behavioral data, it would take weeks. But now like if this works well, like what you have to do is just press the button and go for lunch and wait until the result pops out. And just what you have to do is review the results and check whether it will be biologically plausible or if there is like a buggy logic in it. And I think this doesn't mean that it's kind of gonna replace all the cognitive neuroscientists, but it kind of uh shortens the like time for struggling for like mathematical terms or come up with fancy other different equations. and just focus on more like on experimental designs or other stuff. But who knows, like they might also be capable to do those stuff. I think Taedong also had a comment or a question.
Those name of the parameters is decided by seed or the model itself.
It depends because for some C programs, for for example, the low info C program, as you can see here, they don't give you any information. So in this case, I read in the paper that in this case, there are more parameters that are like very abstracted name, like A, B, or something that you have to understand like afterwards and interpret by yourself. But for like full model C programs, because it actually provides like the baseline code to be the state of the art, because you already know like terms like forgetting rate, learning rate, and etc. It's not like strongly recommended for the large language models to use those variable names, but they still might use something similar in because they would understand that this is like a cognitive model in psychology or something.
So for simpler models, the name is uh, made by the model, and
Mhm.
the name that the model thinks makes sense.
Correct. So sometimes it might be the names will be something that is quite reasonable, that can be easily understandable, because they would have like even though in the case of low info, they might have a grasp of, oh, maybe this is like a cognitive modeling. They might use the term learning rate or such, but it's not necessary. So they would use different terms like A, B, C, which also happens for some programmers that don't really care about other like coworkers and would annoy their coworkers, but the program would still work. So yeah, did I answer your question correctly? Like,
Oh,
is
yes. And I didn't know that the model can interpret the code.
mm,
So mm, then why not just um, just get just put neurons and their connections uh, to the model and make model um, to make a plausible model, like because it will be better to give the biological structure that we can know, and just um, fill the blank page.
uh, I think I could not understand your question. So if
Uh,
it's
uh,
quite hard to explain in English, you can just speak in Korean
아,
so that I
아, 네.
can translate it to
네.
English.
근데, 그러면은 그냥, 아까 논문 같이 이제, 신경세포가 몇 층으로 배열돼 있고, 서로 이제, 흥분 신호나 억제 신호를 어떤 층에 보낸다 정도만 대충 알아낸 다음에 이제, 약간 관측되는 결과에 부합하게, 그, 나머지 모델을 만들어라 이런 식으로 할 수도 있나요?
So the question is whether like just providing the biological knowledge about a circuit or like a system, and then just asking uh, the LLM to try to invent a computational model that explains the um, behavior or observed data based on those biological priors or knowledge. Uh, is that your question? Like, is it possible to do that or not?
Yes, yes.
Um, well, I mean, like, why not? I think it might be possible, but it's a different. So what is important here is that maybe it might be possible, but whether you're gonna be relying on those computational models or not would be something that you have to choose. And as you saw, like um giving biological constraints or like explaining the circuit level connectivity knowledge that we already know might not be enough to um make a computational model that explains the observed data or behavioral data. But yeah, maybe that will be possible in the future. But in the case of Taebom's uh paper, I think there isn't enough observed data that can serve as like that can serve to measure the objective function of the model. With I think that will there won't be enough data for it. So yeah. And besides, as Songji said, like um, if you have a lot of bunch of parameters, you will definitely try to have like a quite good performing model because if you have many parameters, it basically can explain anything. So yeah, I think there should be more improvement in this method approach to be used in a very naive way, but it might be a good starting point to come up with a better method or better idea of making the cognitive modeling process to be more automatic.
Okay, so I looked into some more details while you were talking, and I realized that, in my opinion at least, I think the current LLM is not enough to make a better model because, like, first, when we look at the figure 4 about the quality of fit, if we don't start from the full model, then we even fail to reach to the current, like, the best option, and it is like saturated at that point. And when
Mm,
we start from the full model, it does go up a little bit, but but like 0.3% is definitely not enough to like
mm,
justify like using like one month of like full GPU, and I don't think my boss will be happy about that. Also,
right.
yeah.
You
So if
mean where did
that's
you find 0.4%?
like it was from the figure 4 best program all runs in red data set figure 4.
Wait, let me see. Okay.
So
This one, right?
as yes, so
Oh
as
yeah.
the
It's about 0.4%. Yeah, you're right.
so I'm not sure if my boss will be happy about that, and I should like come up with better models when that if I have a full month's usage of GPUs. Also, like
Right.
when we look at those like all those parameters like LLMs come up with, some are
Mm,
like reasonable, some are not. And in my personal like experiences, it usually come up with dumb parameters that are useless or maybe even like distracting. And
right.
yeah, so I'm not sure like I really definitely think that this article has to go under better estimation, some way to better estimate to see if the model is actually doing randomly better, or is it actually a better model in some sort of ways? Because like yeah, looking at those data and those improvements, I'm not sure if this is actually reliable improvement or not. So I think that should be really neat.
Well, but if you see Figure 3, like they have better model compared to the original one for like all individuals. So I think I can agree that it somehow kind of had like an improvement, and especially when it is compared to RNN models, it seems like it has less interpersonal variability and it's more robust in explaining individual level behavior data. But the problem is, as you said, if it's like if someone asks me, "Are you going to use this model to improve my cognitive model?" No, because it's, as you said, very cost inefficient. But the reason why I chose this paper was because it's the idea itself is quite brilliant. It's like imagine the case of AlphaFold. In AlphaFold 1, like it was impressive, but it wasn't a really big game changer. But as you could get better models and get better ideas about how to fit the model, it can exponentially have a way better performance. And if it can, and if it's quite cheap, or if it's worth it to use it, whether even though it's quite expensive, um, it will be a game changer. And I think we have to, like, if you are like a cognitive scientist who's modeling behaviors or observe data from neural data or so, you really have to be aware of this paper because this might be like a very uh like a starting point of a very big phenomena.
Yeah, I can certainly agree on that point because like this idea is really like brilliant, and I do think that if this somehow develops very well so that it could be somewhat useful and actually used in the field, it would be actually great because like we can reduce all those labor forces and all those like lab PhD candidates who are like working on this problem and just like ask it to the GPU instead. So I
Right.
really think that this is important, but I'm not sure how it's going to go, and I'm not sure if this like I'm not really sure about how this Copland search itself is how important and how well does this works. So my question is on that, but I do agree that the topic itself is very important and it has
Mm.
its value.
Yeah, right. Um, my concern is so at least right now the initial seed is really important, which means our human prior knowledge about biological um intelligence is quite important in modeling human behaviors. But as we saw in many different areas, as AI gets better and better, human prior knowledge becomes something that can even mislead the AI and can be bothering the AI to outperform. Like for example, the case of Go, like it's better for them
Yeah.
to just not imitate ourselves and try to come up with better solutions. So have like a very vague feeling like about it's very vague because it's gonna be I want to believe it's gonna happen like in the next 10 years, not in the next 5 years. Because it's gonna, if it happens in the next 5 years, it means like I'm gonna lose my job. But yeah, I have a concern like maybe if this works too well and can even over exceed our human prior knowledge about biological intelligence, like then there will be a point where people would ask, like, would be doubting about why we need computational neuroscientists or cognitive neuroscientists. You can just ask your GPU. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't want this to happen for like for AlphaFold. Think about people who were working for structured proteins. Their PhD thesis was like a decades ago. Like your PhD thesis would be about a protein structure about one single protein. And this is also same for computational neuroscientists right now. Like you can have your PhD thesis for just one single cognitive model. But if this, even though this comp fund search is not like, it's not really competitive to PhD candidates right now, if it outperforms PhD candidates, there might be a like moment where all computation neuroscientists who were like expert in single model will be like losing their jobs. So yeah, I think this kind of rings a bell to me. It's like it makes me very alert and try to come up with many different ideas and um consider what to do for my PhD. And yeah, so I just wanted to share it because basically this is a computation neuroscience study.
Yeah, I am actually very alert too because I just wrote a paper which can be like replaced by this article someday. So yeah, I'm very aware about this too.
Yeah. Because I also heard like I'm not sure what the subject was, but I heard that the LLM actually passed the iClear peer review. Was it ICLR or ICML? I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think
Like
it was ICLR. So, like, they made lots of papers, and I think like 100 papers, and 30 of them passed the ICLR review or something like that.
yeah, so at least they're better at machine learning conferences than me.
I mean, I don't know, but I still have a lot of hope for scientists. And I mean, AlphaFold didn't exactly remove structural biologists from the picture, so I think I don't know. So isn't there still like hope? And yes, AI scientists, yeah, maybe if AI scientists become viable, the GPU costs rise so that humans become more viable.
Right, right. I mean, yeah, they didn't actually remove all the structural biologists. They might have provided better like it was like a joke, so some people would have advantage on AlphaFold and could do more stuff and like it would have kind of accelerated their
Hmm.
um research process by removing the like dirty parts to identify the structure of the proteins. But like if you want now as if you say you want to be a structural biologist who wants to unravel a certain protein, that's going to be something that is ill-posed. I think that can also happen for computational neuroscientists. Like if you're trying to find like if your goal is to find a cognitive model that explains a certain cognitive process, I wouldn't recommend you to do it. Like I would recommend you to come up with a different question that is more generalizable and not really focus on trying to unravel a new, like a certain degree of computational models.
음, 네. 저희 연구실에서 올라왔던 그 ICLR 관련된 슬랙을 올렸는데, 네. 찾아보니까 ICLR AI 그거랑 섞여 있는데, 인간이 적은 거랑 핵 섞여 있는데, 구별 못했다는 내용이었네요.
Mm, let's see. Okay, is there any more comments or questions?
어, I think I have one question for the former presentation, and I think 어, 지금 여쭤보는 게 좀 더 편하실 것 같아서.
Oh, if you're asking for the
어,
former presentation because we're actually recording this, you can ask
아,
afterwards.
네. This is not directly that correlated, but recently I bought the ex most expensive plan of ChatGPT, and I try to like read this paper using it, and I wanted to like mm, the like the answer of the GPT can teach me some of mathematics in this paper and the former paper, and it was hard. I think it was not just good because like it was not better than the search results. So, do you have any tips for using ChatGPT?
So when you said you bought the most expensive model, I'm not sure if you're talking about the $20 model, the $200 model. So I don't think I haven't used the $200 model, so I'm not sure if it's useful. But for the $20 model, it's certainly been a lot of help. So like even when I'm doing like the convolution, probability distributions, it can integrate really well, but I only ask it math questions if I know it has an answer. So if you don't know if the math question has an answer, there's a higher probability that the LLM would hallucinate an answer that really doesn't exist. But if you know at least that it has a closed form answer, I think LLMs perform relatively very well in mathematics, and it's really improved quite a lot from when ChatGPT first came on. And I remember when ChatGPT first came online, the first question I asked it was how to prove how to prove the Euler's like the modular theorem in number theory, and it had this kind of ridiculous proof that made no sense at all, but now it proves it really well. So I think yeah, math is really good, and especially the rote computation that appears in most applied math papers as in my presentation. It's really a lot of help because like oftentimes you don't have pen and paper and you can just ask an LM and it just calculates it for you. Like it's can perhaps I'm not sure if it can yet, but perhaps it can completely replace Wolfram Alpha, and I'm not sure about that, but I don't know. Maybe they can build an interface with Wolfram Alpha, but or something like that.
Thanks. Maybe my script was not enough. Mm, I, uh, I, the Korean word that 딸깍 was, I thought that word when listening to this presentation, and maybe that this kind of program can save many people like who are not friendly with math, and yes.
But you would still have to be familiar with math because you have to interpret the model. But it might maybe GPT or LLMs would also provide you like very friendly explanation about the program that it wrote. So yeah, but still, like you, if you really want to, GPT provides you to, or other LLMs provide you to have like a better, um, to write code in a more quicker way. But still, if you really want to debug or try to find some issues, and if the LLM fails to fix it, you still need a capability to write a code or understand the logic. So still, you would really need to be at least know quite a bit of mathematics if you really want to be a computational neuroscientist.
Yeah. So more on so this is my experience. So like in the paper from Younghoon, you notice that the model used JAX NumPy library from which was developed by Google DeepMind. But I have, in my experience, LLM can generate poor JAX NumPy code because JAX is a very recent package, and often LLM when I told LLM, I gave the LLM like 12 recurrences with matrices, and I wanted it to generate the complete code, but it couldn't at all. So I had to do it all from hand myself. So I think there are still some limitations, especially when it comes to bespoke or proprietary or like small package.
Okay, I think that's it. So we're gonna end our presentation here. Gonna upload it on YouTube, and if Tebum is okay, we're gonna really for these two clips, we're gonna be releasing it into the public because like when I say public, it doesn't mean that like I'm gonna spread it all to everybody, but like it might be able to be searchable through YouTube or
음,
it might be sometimes provided to people who like if we want to introduce our study.
음, 주- 한국어로 말하자면 좋은 것 같아요. 뭐 수학의 즐거움 같은 유튜브도 뭔가 되게 이런 줌콜 같은 거 올려놓고 이외에도 뭐 샌프란시스코 뉴럴 네트워크 스터디 이런 것도 다 유튜브에 올려놓은 거 보고 저희도 올려놓으면 좋을 것 같다 생각했었습니다. 그래도 괜찮습니다.
네, 그러면 업로드 하는 걸로 하고 네, 다음 스터디는 언제 할지는 제가 또 투표를 올리도록 하겠습니다. 네, 다들 수고 많으셨습니다.
네.